Hello. So I was outside getting some water, and I started hearing the guys talking, and they said, "Welcome to How to Web." And you guys were like, so can we get a proper welcome to How to Web? That's much better. So hello, everyone. My name is Anka. I have been active in the startup industry for quite a while. And I think that it's worth mentioning the new beginnings. The guys talked a little bit about it, but I think that the theme of this event is a lot, I think it fits more the current times than they mentioned. First of all, because of the elections that just happened. I know that a lot of you are apolitical and you don't care about that, but I personally stayed in line for 8.5 hours in London to vote, and I didn't get to vote. So I'm very excited about the changes that are happening, and I think that it's a new beginning for Romania as well. And I hope we don't get disappointed. I truly believe that we won't. So yay for a new president, yay for new beginnings about that. It's very exciting, and actually it's very exciting also for people abroad and in the region, because they think, that if it can happen here, it can happen there. So things are going to change, after 25 years, it's time for things to get better. Okay, so a little bit about my background, just a little bit. As Bogdan said, I was with Startup Weekend for a while. Now I have an organization, a nonprofit. It's called CE Changers. And I'm trying to connect the people that are active in the startup community throughout the post-communist countries, and together to accelerate the development of the region through entrepreneurship. So, it's, as Bogdan said, a lot of people know me, and I think it's very important that we all work together for this. And I'm very excited to be here because it's new beginnings in another sense as well. Like Bogdan stepped down as the CEO of How to Web, and I remember when I attended the first one in 2010, oh my God, I was terrified. I was so shy and scared, like, oh, I don't know anyone in Bucharest. I didn't talk to anyone throughout the conference, and now here I am. So things can change, and Daniel is doing a really good job, and the team is doing an amazing job. I hope that, you will enjoy this conference as much as the other ones. And please learn as much as you can, because the speakers are great. And I also would like to thank the speakers. Without you guys, we wouldn't be here. And I think it's really cool that people from outside are interested in our country and are coming here, and try to teach you guys what they know, their experience. Also, today is powered by Avantgate. That's the main sponsor for today. And that being said, so thank you, Avantgate. Enjoy the coffee and the lunch break. Okay, so mobile is the theme of the future. Mobile is shaping, the culture and the way that our industry works. Basically, all the industries work. So we're going to kickstart the conference by talking about the mobile future. And for that, I'm inviting Chris Chabot on stage. He's an inventor and Good morning. An innovator. So probably an inventor as well, or an inventor.
Yeah,
there you go.
So.
Thank you, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the intro. Hi, everyone. Good morning. How are you doing? Thank you so much for coming out early in the day. I know that 10 o'clock, if you're an engineer like me, that feels like early in the day. We all know what it is. So today we're talking about new beginnings, and I think the mobile future is exactly that new beginning. At conferences like this, people talk about mobile only, mobile first, new web developments or mobile devices. That doesn't give credit to the change that's actually happening in our industry. There's a much bigger wave of innovation that's happening. And that's what I mean by the mobile future. So, to help set the stage, I don't think the clicker is working, guys. I'm just talking to the tech crowd, I'm so sorry. Can we get this thing up? Well, someone needs some coffee, clearly. It might be me. Yeah, absolutely. We're on the next slide, so that's good. Yeah? Let's see if this works. No. Should I just tell you next slide? Yeah. Oh. Can you go back one? So, no, back, the other direction. So this is how you start on the early morning. Thank you so much for sticking with us. If you can go to the next slide. This is going to be a comedy bit. So if you guys can give me a location and a character. So I'll just start talking while they go to the next slide. So my talk today is about transformative innovation. Now, transformative innovation is a big word. I would love the next slide, guys. Anyway, so transformation. When we talk about transformation, one of the examples that I love to use is the venerable printing press. And the reason why I love the printing press is because it caused all these amazing things in our world. For instance, free press, democracy, scientific method, all these things would not have been possible without the printing press. However, it certainly didn't start out like that. Like many new technologies, when a new technology is invented, you use it to do the things that came before it. And that was true with the printing press as well. So when they invented this, they mostly used it to print Bibles and a few of the classic philosophers. And that makes sense, because up to that moment, these were written by hand, by monks. That was expensive and time-consuming. So what do you do with a printing press? You print more Bibles and more classic philosophers. It took 50 years to get to the next point. And if we can go to the next slide. So it took 50 years to get to this. And this is the first novel ever written. It was a really clever guy who owned a printing press, and he said, well, if people are willing to pay for the most holiest of books, then I bet they're willing to pay for an erotic novel. Of course, the Pope declared that this was the end of civilization as we know it. Thank you. And the whole community was in outrage that something that was used for the holiest of books could be used for something like this. But that's the way of innovation, right? People always resist change in the beginning. It took another 150 years to get to something truly magical, which we may or may not get to. Could you guys hit the next slide button? So it took 150 years to get to this, and this is something really magical. There's a group that called themselves the Natural Philosophers, and the Natural Philosophers was a college of academia. And they said, we are not going to hold anything true until it can be proven to be true. Now that sounds like a simple thing, right? But if you think about it, people are really bad at criticizing themselves. We have a skill that compensates for it. We're very good at criticizing others. So they said, we're going to write down our experiments, not just the outcome, but each and every step of how we got there. Then we're going to collect those in a journal. We're going to print up that journal using the printing press and distribute it to everyone in the Natural College. Now, that was the birth of scientific method. That was the thing that allows everything that shapes our society today. That was one of the biggest changes in history. So it wasn't the printing press that was really exciting. It wasn't the technology. The technology didn't cause scientific method. It was the culture shaped around it and that was made possible by the technology that really changed society. And that's transformative innovation. It's not the technology itself that's interesting. It's the things that it enables. And that's what we're seeing with the internet and mobile as well. Can we go to the next slide? So when I say we see that on the internet, in 2008 is one of the moments where that really hit home for me. There was this situation in South Korea, and they lifted the import restriction for US beef. Now, they restricted US beef import for a long time because of the mad cow disease scare back in the days. You might still remember that. And that this was met by protest wasn't unusual. That often happens in these kind of political situations. It was who was doing the protesting that was really surprising. It was teenage girls. Now, when you think about it, you don't expect teenage girls to do protesting, right? So what happened was that these teenage girls were hanging out in the forum of the most popular boy band in South Korea, and they were talking to each other about all the stuff that teenage girls talk about. But they also talked about how upset they were that no one asked them if they were willing to take that health risk. The people of South Korea were not consulted on that decision, and they disagreed. So in this cacophony of upset teenage girls, they got so upset that they said, we're going to go out and hold a peaceful candlelight protest. So there was tens of thousands of teenage girls that flooded the public squares. Now, when you're the government and you see this, you don't know what to do, right? Like, this is not a usual situation. There's no playbook that helps you to figure out what to do when teenage girls are protesting. So they waited a little while, hoping they would go away. They didn't. So they did what governments always do. They send in the riot police with their body armor, their weapon sticks, and their water cannons. And they dispersed the crowds. What they didn't count on, however, is that teenage girls have smartphones. And with smartphones, you can take videos and pictures, which of course they did, and they uploaded it to the internet. Well, if you're used to the internet, you can guess what happened next, right? The reaction was instantaneous, voluminous, and full of outrage. In fact, it was such a major international incident when these images hit the internet that the South Korean government was forced to step down. Now, you might be thinking, what made the government think that they could get away with this? Well, all of human history up to that moment. It was the internet that fundamentally changed how elections and governmental systems work. And I think you saw that in Romania as well, and that's happening all over the world. So that is a big change. The other big change is, I'm so sorry for the technical difficulties. The other big change is just how unpredictable technology is. I remember reading a study where AT&T and Bell Labs, which was pre-breakup in America, they invented the cell phone. And they said, well, let's see if this is a technology we need to invest in. So they asked McKinsey, and at some point people start laughing when I say McKinsey, so you kind of know what's coming. They asked McKinsey to look into how large the cell phone market was going to be 20 years from now, let's say the year 2000. So McKinsey did their decision matrices, their graphs, all the stuff that McKinsey consultants would do. And they said, well, we think there's going to be about 900,000 customers. They only missed it by a couple of billion. You know, that was a really embarrassing error. It cost AT&T billions of dollars to go back into the mobile market. That is the unpredictability of innovation. You don't know what's going to happen next. You really don't. So this is innovation. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. One of the other moments, to use a little bit more of a recent story, is when I was talking to Tony Conrad. He's a good friend of mine. He's the founding partners of True Ventures. And he was one of the early investors in Uber. Now, I know you don't have Uber here, but it's really quite a wonderful service. You use your cell phone to order a car. It shows up. You can see where it is on the map. It's pretty cool. The thing that surprised me was when he told me, Chris, Uber is changing the way restaurants work. And I went, that doesn't make any sense. We're talking about a car service. Well, he said, you go out to dinner, you have a couple of drinks. So of course you can't drive home, right? So you need a taxi. And that meant that taxis and restaurants always had to be in the same area, downtown. The thing that Uber changed is that you can now go out of a restaurant, pull out your phone, and you can order a car right there, and it will be there reliably. And that is changing where people can build restaurants. So those kind of innovations have really weird effects. The other thing that I'll say on innovation before we go to the next section is just how fast innovation is moving. Back in the day when electricity, steam engines, and all those things were invented, it might have well been that when you were an adult, a technology was introduced, but your children will be the ones to use it. You would never be affected by it. Thank you. And so the stat that you can see here is that electricity took 46 years to go from the introduction to being mainstream where pretty much everyone had electricity. Now, if you look down this graph, you will see telephone, radio, personal computer, mobile phones, the web, smartphones. They're all getting adopted so much faster. And there's a lot of science reason for why that is happening. But the key takeaway is that innovation doesn't just happen over generations anymore. It happens over a couple of years. And that is a fundamental change in how our lives work. So that, in a nutshell, is the framing for what we're talking about today, the changes of innovation. So with that, I'd like to go to how mobile phones are currently developing. And one of the things that I find interesting about mobile phones is just how many of them there are. There's about 1.6 billion personal computers in the world. Most of them are either shared by a family or they live on our office desk. They're really not that personal if you think about it. They're also very static devices. They don't move around a lot. They don't come with you. Mobile phones, however, are essentially different. Heck, I bet a lot of you in the audience today, you can barely go to the bathroom without bringing your mobile phone, right? They're literally extensions of ourselves. We'd be lost without them. So they're intensely personal devices. There's over 2 billion of them already. There's more mobile phones and smartphones than there's personal computers. And we expect this to grow to 4 or 5 billion devices in the next few years. Now, if you think about it, the real impact of that is that the size of the internet is going to double or triple in size over the next few years. That is a fundamental change. And the thing that happens when you look at ecosystems that are growing that fast is that they tend to absorb everything that came before it. Like the internet, of course, absorbed newspapers, music, voiced movies, entertainment. So as mobile phones are growing as an ecosystem, they're absorbing everything else. Payments, commerce, all those things are becoming smartphone driven. It is the new ecosystem. Now, we can definitely see that when we look at the edges of society. It's often said that necessity is the mother of innovation. And that makes sense, because if you're happy and comfortable, you sit at home and you play Flappy Bird, right? That's pretty much all you do in your day. However, if you have serious challenges, like if you live in Africa and you don't always have access to electricity, you don't have an existing infrastructure. Hell, in sub-Saharan Africa, only 25% of the people have a bank account. That made commerce really difficult. So what they did is they invented a system called M-Pesa. Now, M-Pesa is a system where you can send payments, get payment notifications, check your balance using text messages. And the reason why it's based on text messages is logical, because if you don't have access to electricity, you don't want to use a smartphone that can barely last for a conference, right? You need something where the battery will last a couple of days. So they use feature phones and they do all the payments on that. And that system in a little bit less than 6 years became so popular that over 43% of the GDP of Kenya is flowing through M-Pesa. It is taking over all commerce in the country there. Now that is innovation. Now that's the kind of innovation that shows you where the future is going to. We see the same thing at a much larger scale when we look at China. China, to me, is one of my favorite examples, because a lot of people, when they think of China, they still have a Kennedy-era kind of impression of it. It's the factory of the world that produces stuff, ships it to the West, but for the rest, they're pretty backward. But that is an old-fashioned look that's no longer true. It's the place where innovation is happening at tremendous scales. For instance, they have 14 cities with over 5 million people, 41 cities with a population over 2 million people, 80,000 people joining the middle class every day. When you have that tremendous level of growth, you run into some troubles that we never had, like you can't build stores fast enough to service such a major population growth that suddenly has disposable income. It will be too expensive, it will cost you too much money to build enough stores. So what do these people do? They shop online. And keep in mind, for this isn't even e-commerce to them. It's the only form of commerce they've ever known. And they shop at tremendous scales. Like a couple of days ago, there was Singles Day again in China. Singles Day was invented by Taobao, Tmall. And it's kind of the opposite of Valentine's Day. When in Valentine's Day, you celebrate being in a relationship with someone. Singles Day is the opposite of that. You celebrate being single. So what do you do when you're single? Well, you buy presents for yourself, right? And they give out nice discounts, and there's a big advertising campaign around it. It is so popular that a couple days ago, they sold $9.3 billion of goods in a single day. $9.3 billion in a single day. That's 263 million packages. Well, they give Santa Claus a run of its money, right? That's incredible volume. The other thing that we see is payments. Payments in China are booming. If you go to Beijing, you can barely get a taxi where they accept cash. You have to pay with WeChat or any of the other mobile-driven payment platforms. So to put it in perspective, PayPal was kind of the name that we all know. 2013, PayPal did 180 billion in transactions. Alipay, which drives a lot of this electronic payments in China, did $1.6 trillion in the same time frame. They could buy multiple PayPals. Like, the scale of this is tremendous. The innovation that's happening at the edges of society really show what happens when there's no innovator's dilemma keeping you back from using that innovation. And that makes it an amazing preview of what we can expect to happen here in a few years. The other fundamental changes, especially in a place called How to Web, is that when you build a website, the thing that you do is you build a website and you don't want to have a long registration form, so you use Facebook or Twitter or Google or any of these other sign-in methods. Then you might pull in a social graph from all the friends from that network. But of course, your customers are locked into using that service, and if that service locks you out, then you probably lose a lot of your users as well. And you're kind of locked to those networks. Mobile phones changed that fundamentally. For many years, a lot of people, myself included, we worked on technologies like open social, open ID, and all that kind of jazz to try to open up this space where everyone could compete. And mobile phones have finally made that happen, almost by accident. Because if you look at a lot of modern applications, they use mobile phone numbers as your identity. Why else would you need anything else? You already have a phone. It has a phone number, right? And if you want a list of all the people you communicate with, hey, your phone has an address book. That's all the information you need. And in fact, it even has an open video library, photo library, task management, calendar, to-do list that has so much information about you, all on the device available to everyone. And the impact of this is pretty tremendous. For instance, when WhatsApp was down for half a day, there was over 6 million people that switched over to Telegram. Now, Telegram is a little bit like WhatsApp, built by the guys from VKontakte in Russia. 6 million people switched over. And they could just keep on chatting because they were using the same phone number, the same address book. They were not locked into any systems anymore. So it's fundamentally changing the dynamics of the marketplace. You are not longer locked into a platform. Instead, it's open to everyone. Everyone, including you, can now compete with the big guys in the market. And that is a fundamental opportunity. The other thing that's really new as well is, I remember when I was working at Google back in the day, and I was sitting in a meeting, and this was before anyone had heard of Google Now. And a PM's phone rang and it said, hey, you better leave for the airport because there's a lot of traffic, so you need to leave now to get your flight. Now that sounds like a really simple thing, but if you think about it, computing devices have been very good in giving us information, but they've been very bad at giving us helpful suggestions. Those are very different in their nature. And suggestions are things where you understand what's happening in a person's life and you say, hey, you better drink something now because you look dehydrated. Or hey, you better put up the air conditioning because it's hot in here. So the thing that makes mobile phones special is that it knows so much about you. It doesn't just have your location so you can put the dot on Google Maps without asking you where you are. But it also knows the light levels, the sound levels, pollution levels, temperature. It has a bit of a guess of your social environment as well. Who's close to nearby you? What is your relationship with those people? Do you communicate with them often? It knows a lot about blood oxygen levels, heartbeats, blood pressures, all those kind of things if you have a fitness device. So mobile phones have so much information about you that computers never had. Computers never had any idea of these factors in your life. And things like Google Now show you a great preview of what's going to be possible with those technologies. But we're still in the very early days of experimenting with that. I think we're going to see a lot of very exciting applications that will take all that contextual information and make useful suggestions based on it. So that's a pretty big change. The final change that I think we're going to see a lot of in the future is wearable computing. Now, we often talk about the Internet of Things, wearable computing. Google Glass is one of the things that people often talk about, the Apple Watch, or all that kind of jazz. If I look at those devices, we haven't quite found out the scientific method of the printing press. We're still in a phase where we're experimenting. We haven't even gotten to the first novel of the printing press yet. But the interesting thing, if you look at all these transformative innovations, they don't have their impact until they're technologically boring. It's when everyone has it and everyone knows how to use it that these things really start changing society. And that's where I see the power of wearable computing, is that it allows computing to fade away into the background. We don't even have to be aware that we have computing around us. My parents, if they were a little bit more technically skilled, they probably could tell you how many processors they had in their home 20 years ago. These days, everything has a CPU in it. Everything is a computing device. We probably can't count the amount of devices with CPUs in it anymore. So as technology is becoming part of the fabric of our existence, It's going to make it easier to use for everyone, and a lot of new applications are going to be built on top of it. So when you look at those trends, there's so much more information. We have the Internet of Things, wearable computing, contextual information, an internet that's going to triple in size, payments, commerce, ticketing, entertainment, all being absorbed by mobile. That is an ecosystem that has tremendous growth, tremendous opportunities. In fact, if you were working in the web days, you would have been forgiven to think that innovation was pretty much done. All the big companies have already been invented. Like, what can we contribute to the system? But that is exactly why I think that mobile is so incredibly exciting. What came before was but a stepping stone for the next big wave of innovation, and we're just getting started on it. Now, that's what I call the mobile future. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Where are you leaving?
Oh,
maybe they have
we
questions.
got Q&A. That's right. Sorry. Not every conference has
going
Q&A. So do
So-
we have any questions? Do you have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Does it annoy you when people in the audience are on their phones while you're speaking?
I know, that's pretty good, right? Well, the thing is that when you grow up in a time where there's no mobile phones, you might look at it and think these guys are distracted. But I hope that a whole bunch of people are actually taking photos, they were tweeting about it. Like this guy here, he says he definitely was, so I appreciate that. So they were actually enjoying the event more because of their mobile phone, because they can share it with their extended circle, and they're not being distracted. So it's a new perspective, but I encourage it. Tweets, Facebook posts, go ahead, guys.
Go ahead.
I'll repeat the question if I can hear you. Oh, here's a microphone. Down there.
Hi, my name is Bogdan. Chris, you mentioned only the good things brought by smartphones, technology, and so on from now to, let's say, 2020 or even beyond. But what are the risks that you see in this? Because I talk about security, I talk about privacy, and other stuff as well.
Yeah. So that's an excellent question. The way that I often look at new technologies is that it's a little bit like a human being. You're born, you develop, you find yourself, and there's always this messy period of experimentation. Like we call those the teenage years, and the teenage years are ugly, right? We've all gone through them, and we know the kind of mess that happens when you go through it.
Yeah,
and
some
technology
people screw
is
up
like that.
during teenage
Of course,
years.
a lot of people screw up during the teenage years. In fact, I would say you haven't been a teenager if you didn't screw up. But innovation, by its essence, is unpredictable. We don't know what's going to happen, right? And if you don't know what's going to happen, you have to experiment. And I would say that every experiment is valuable, even if it ends in misery. It still leaves a sign that says, don't go here, there's trouble here. We tried it, it didn't work, we have to be careful. So it's an unavoidable part of innovation that you make mistakes. So it's really good that people like yourself are defending our rights, defending our privacy, talking about the impact of technologies. That's a vital part of experimentation, that there's always a voice that says, hey, be careful, we need to adjust to this situation. But you can't avoid it. Unless you stop innovation and you say, we're done, the mess will always be part of how you move forward. So I agree it's important. I agree we should keep talking about it. I agree that there are risks. But in the end, for me, any innovation has always brought on something much better in society. Like the Industrial Revolution, in the beginning, people said it's going to cost us our jobs, but it extended our lives by decades. It made us so much happier. It empowered us. It allowed us to develop our minds and not just our bodies to work on the lands. So every new ecosystem, when we figure it out, is so much bigger and so much better than what came before it, but there's a messy way to get there. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. Here's another question.
I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, what would be the next thing after smartphones? What would you put there on the graph?
I've got some ideas around that. So the tricky thing is that, as I showed earlier in the presentation, you cannot predict innovation. Innovation by its nature is completely surprising, like I just said. Now, if I would have to take a guess, I think that 3D printing could have a really big impact. Now, 3D printing is undergoing the hype cycle. Gartner at some point defined a hype cycle, and they say there's like heightened expectations, major disappointments, and then it becomes useful. So 3D printing is going through that. We're somewhere between the heightened expectations and the disappointment. That's kind of the process we're going through. But innovation happens when there's fundamental assumptions on how we do things, and those assumptions change. Like we assumed that paper was the best way of distributing information. And that was true for hundreds of years. And then, of course, the internet came along and it completely destroyed that assumption. Now, 3D printing has the potential to destroy a whole bunch of assumptions as well. Like the assumption that it's cheaper to build something in China, put it on a ship, store it in a warehouse, transport it to a store, and sell it from a shelf. That entire chain becomes irrelevant if you can just print something. The only thing you have to transport are the basic materials to do your printing. So as 3D printing becomes more nuanced and subtle and capable of printing things like circuit boards and all that kind of stuff, or maybe even food stuff, it could disrupt the entire logistical and commerce chain to the point where you just go to a corner shop, you press a button, and the thing that you want is being printed on the fly. You're no longer losing money on storing things, transporting things, manufacturing things somewhere else. That will be a multi-trillion-dollar disruption. So there's a lot of those technologies that we see coming. Medical sciences are changing. There's some really cool stuff going to happen in our lifetime. So I can't predict what it is, but I think it will be those kind of things.
Thank you.
Thank you.
One more question?
Yeah.
No. Thank you very much, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.